In the 2015 NBA draft, there was a discussion that the entire world was debating. Who would become the best big man of this class? Karl Anthony Towns or Jahlil Okafor? Both had their strengths and weaknesses.
Will scoop, spike to midcourt. That is not going to work today.
Back then, Towns was deemed as a defensive savant, with a limited offensive game that needed work, even drawing comparisons to Andrew Bogut. It was quite ironic, considering he's been one of the most efficient, polished scorers since entering the NBA, and his defense was the main point of criticism over the years. The Bogut comparison became completely off the moment he stepped onto the NBA court. Okafor, on the other hand, was labeled as the most polished offensive big man of this class, by far, and supposedly a far superior offensive player than Cat ever will be.
He's the key to that defense right there. That guy's pretty good too.
Basketball scout Michael Visenberg stated, he was, quote, one of the most advanced low-post scorers the college game has seen in quite some time. While Towns has had his ups and downs throughout his career, there's no doubt in anyone's mind he's lived up to what a #1 overall pick should be. For Jahlil Okafor, however, it was a completely different story. It was obvious by his second year in the NBA, his career was hanging on by a thread, and he wasn't built to be an NBA caliber player. In this video, let's take a detailed look at what made Jahlil Okafor become completely irrelevant in such a short time. A player once ranked as the #1 prospect coming out of high school by every scouting agency. Yet, how was everyone so wrong about his projection? But despite all that, he was still able to fight and claw his way back to the NBA. Finally, after all these years.
Who's really been the offense for the Sixers early on. We're thinking about a three for a second. Now taking Mozgov. Sixers up one. Yet another lead change, the 11th of the first half. Jahlil Okafor, you can count it at a foul.
In his first couple years in the league, there was one thing that everyone could agree on. All the projections, all the scouting on his skill set were correct. Jahlil Okafor had a tremendous amount of talent as a low-post scorer. In fact, even as a rookie, he displayed a level of calm and patience with his footwork and positioning that even veteran centers could only dream of. Some things coaches cannot teach. Okafor, at 19 years old, had a phenomenal instinct for scoring in the post. Immediately, you can tell the skills were there. He clearly was a very meticulous, calculated center. Very good at working the angles with a knack for putting the ball into the basket. Unfortunately, there were several things working against Okafor. First, the circumstance he got drafted to. Sam Hinkie and the Philadelphia 76ers made it clear that they were going to tank. It was no secret. Hinkie famously dubbed their tanking method as the process. As they signed a bunch of G League caliber players, or guys who simply didn't belong in the NBA to begin with the sole purpose of losing games and amassing a collection of high draft picks to build for the future. Okafor was the result of one of those high draft picks they got.
Jahlil Okafor from Duke University.
In theory, Hinkie's thought process made sense. Tanking equals high draft picks equals good prospects. In his mind, that was the most surefire way to build a contender, and eventually the NBA was forced to change how the draft lottery worked, a direct response to Sam Hinkie's Sixers. However, what ultimately hurt the process the most was their inability to develop most of their young, high draft picks because they were surrounding them with absolute crap. For Jahlil Okafor, he joined a team that won 10 games in his rookie season, a team that finished near the bottom of the league in three-point percentage, and near the top in turnovers, and the worst offensive rating in the entire league. How can you expect any player to develop under these circumstances? The lack of spacing made it hard for him to expand his offense, and the lack of competent defenders made him exposed every single night, and his weakness on defense became more apparent than ever. Not to mention, the Sixers also drafted Joel Embiid the year prior, so when he was finally ready to play, there was no need for Jahlil Okafor anymore. They both play the same position. While Okafor averaged over 17 points a game in his rookie season, it would be the highest scoring mark of his short-lived career, as by his sophomore season, Joel Embiid took the court for the first time after 2 years of absence. And immediately, it became obvious that he was a far superior player than Okafor. As a result, he got pushed to the side, benched in favor of Embiid. Unfortunately, during this time, it wasn't just the circumstance of the Sixers that stunted Okafor's growth. There was so much more to his game that severely hindered his development. Okafor's defense was off the charts, and by that I mean he wasn't even on the chart to begin with. In terms of defending the pick and roll, he gave up 1.03 points per possession, which ranked at the 28th percentile. But it's not just that, it's his complete lack of awareness, combined with his terrible lateral quickness. This was a problem area that scouts predicted. His slow-footed movement and lack of athleticism projected him to be a bad defender, but there was hope he could mitigate that by working hard and putting more effort on defense. That did not happen at all. Instead, not only was he arguably the least athletic center in the league, but also the laziest. You know, I've seen people make comparisons for Jahlil Okafor, saying how he's a similar player to Al Jefferson or Enes Kanter, guys who are primarily post-up players who are bad defensively. What makes Okafor so much worse than those guys? Well, for starters, those two players can provide so much more than just their post-up play. For example, Kanter, despite his poor defense, was always near the top of the league in rebounding, especially offensive rebounding. There were several years when he actually ranked with the highest offensive rebounding rate in the whole league, grabbing nearly 17% of all available offensive rebounds when he's on the floor. Kanter played with a much higher motor and just more effort in general. In addition, he also sported a decent mid-range jumper, compared to Okafor, who could not shoot outside the paint whatsoever. He lacked the rebounding and energy of Kanter. Even with Kanter's variety of strengths, unfortunately, he still remained a bench player for the majority of his career, simply due to his horrendous defense. So this gives you an idea of how important defense is as a big man. Also, the idea that Okafor's post-up game is the only aspect that he excels in, and even that is generous to say. As a rookie, he finished with a total of 315 post-up possessions, which was the 11th most out of all players. Yet he only converted 0.85 points per possession on them, good for the 54th percentile. Basically, despite his ample number of attempts in the post, Okafor was just barely an average post-up player. So even in his one skill he was supposed to dominate in, he was still not that good. Of course, this doesn't take into account the circumstantial factors I mentioned earlier, like the Sixers being the worst team in the league with the worst spacing in the league. All of these issues, they exemplified all of Okafor's weaknesses. Apart from losing his mother at a young age, for Jahlil Okafor, his early years in Philly were the worst years of his life. Okafor was a nice kid with hopes and dreams like everybody else, but he felt left out the moment he arrived in Philly. By his second year, where it seemed like he fell out of the rotation and the franchise no longer cared about him, Okafor made this statement to the public, quote, "I was kind of already thinking that I'm not really a part of this future. I definitely feel like I'm the scapegoat for a lot of the process issues. Sometimes I do think it would be great to get a fresh start, be on a new team, new surroundings, new teammates. I think about that often, and I think that's something that could benefit me." Okafor did have a point. Remember, the Sixers drafted 3 centers in a row in 3 straight drafts, all of whom were very high picks. From the very beginning, they knew all of them couldn't play together, and they just wanted to see which one would be the center they'd build around. I mean, they got 3 shots at it. It became obvious right when Embiid stepped on the floor that he was their guy, while the other 2 were thrown to the side.
76ers have made a move ahead of Thursday's trade deadline. Sixers have traded Nerlens Noel to the Mavericks.
Nerlens Noel would get traded in the middle of the 2015-16 season. A year later, Okafor, right at the start of his 3rd season, would also get traded.
Jahlil Okafor's time in Philly is over. The Sixers have traded the big man to Brooklyn.
It was the first time of his NBA career where he felt relief to be leaving an organization that frankly left him to rot. However, just because Okafor left Philly, it doesn't necessarily mean his career was on the right path. All those aforementioned problems still existed. He's not gonna magically be a better defender. He's not gonna miraculously develop a jump shot. or any other skill set besides his one-dimensional post-up game. It's not like he joined a good team either. When he arrived in Brooklyn, they weren't much better. In fact, in his 6 seasons in the NBA, Okafor has never played for a team that won more than 33 games. He's never sniffed the playoffs in any season of his career. He not only severely underachieved, but he finished his career among the worst win-loss records in the history of basketball. Of all players who played at least 200 games in their career, Okafor has the 11th worst win-loss percentage ever, winning just 26.3% of his total games. He's one of the biggest losers ever, and sadly, while there was still a sliver of hope upon his departure from Philly, it became excruciatingly clear that this guy is not an NBA caliber player. One aspect of his game that his coaches were determined to develop was his passing ability. As he became a bench player for the remainder of his career as he jumped from team to team, he was still a great one-on-one scorer against opposing benches, so much so that he sometimes drew double teams. In fact, he slowly became one of the most efficient scorers in the entire league as he feasted upon lesser talent from the bench. Despite that, he still got criticized for being a black hole.
But you got to give the Pelicans a lot of credit for staying in the game.
And big Okafor is throwing it down tonight, baby. Wow.
A former scout had this to say about his failure to adapt to the NBA game. Quote, "I scouted him in college, and in college he was seemingly a better passer. Once he gets in a rotation and knows he's going to play, maybe he won't be so shot hungry. But whenever they throw him the ball, it was never seen from again. There's a reason he's always averaged more turnovers than assists. Okafor's tunnel vision and unwillingness to pass further damaged his offensive value. And about 3 or 4 years after leaving Philly, every team he's been on realized he's never gonna change. This is who he is, and it wasn't good enough." By the age of 25, he fell out of the NBA. For good. Well, I think so, at least. Of course, there's other factors that hindered his ability to develop, in particular, 2 different knee surgeries within a 4-year span. Okafor was never the most athletic guy to begin with, but with a lingering knee problem that haunted him for years, it sapped whatever speed he had left. Nonetheless, it was just a small obstacle amidst an ocean of problems with his game. I've heard a popular opinion about Okafor, something that I've seen across the media, forums, Reddit, and it goes something like this. Okafor entered the NBA at the wrong time. If it was the 90s, he'd be a star. I've heard this honestly so many times. People base that opinion on strictly how good he was in the low post, and that the game back then was much slower and less three-point centric, so him being slow wasn't as much of a burden on defense. Now, there's a reason that most people could only name like 5 or 6 centers from the 90s, because even back then, the position required a ton of skill, a lot of tenacity, defense, rebounding, and effort, all of which Okafor also lacked. There's no point in NBA history where a player of his caliber would be an all-star, and he certainly wouldn't be able to hang among the greatest centers in history. Since his departure from the NBA, however, Okafor is desperately still trying to make a comeback. In 2021, he signed with the Atlanta Hawks. He got waived 3 weeks later. Fast forward a bit, and after a few years overseas, in 2024, he signed with the Indiana Pacers, and then he got waived a few hours later. Then subsequently joined the Pacers G League team, hoping that this is the chance for him to get noticed by other NBA teams, and possibly make his also glorious return to the NBA. On the bright side, we're finally seeing aspects of his game that we've been waiting for so long. He got better at passing out of a post-up, actually using his eyes and finding teammates who are open. Even his quickness and speedy footwork, it looks like he's actually putting in effort. Along with an actual jump shot? That's never been a consistent part of his game before. It's a fresh new thing we've always yearned for him to do. He's finally in the right headspace to make a comeback. The best way to sum up Okafor's new mindset was recited by his former teammate, TJ McConnell, who entered the league at the same time as Okafor, on the same team, on that disastrous era of the Sixers, where despite loss after loss, they bonded over nothing more than passion for the sport they love. Quote, "I think when me and him both came into the league was transitioning at that point into what it is now. Back to the basket bigs weren't necessarily not needed, but there was a need for pick and pop bigs. For him to see that and work on his game, that just speaks volumes about who he is as a player, and his progression has been unbelievable. Time will tell where Okafor's progression will take him, but for the first time in a long time, there's a real chance for the former #1 ranked prospect in the nation to return to his rightful place in professional basketball." And that's all, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section about Jahlil Okafor. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.